Hello, everybody. In today's video, we'll be talking about Donald Trump's short list of choices for vice president, and we'll be analyzing and grading the three main names that have come up and still remain in play. But before I get into that, I want to make a brief announcement. My apologies for the lack of uploads this past week. I broke my microphone, and I'm going to get it likely either tomorrow or the day after. But for the time being, this is going to be the audio quality. And my apologies. I am sure it will not be very good, but I wanted to get this video out because I think this is a very interesting topic and because I've already put off posting for a week. So hopefully it's not too bad and it will be fixed within the next few days. Now, there are three candidates here that I think have a real shot at being Trump's VP. And the consensus is that those three candidates have narrowed down to be Governor of North Dakota, Doug Burgum, Ohio Senator JD Vance, and Florida Senator Marco Rubio. So I'm going to go through these. We're going to start with Doug Burgum, and we're going to talk about how good these options would be for Trump if you were to pick them. The pros and cons. We're going to weigh kind of both sides and what the impact would be. So the first, obviously, Doug Burgum. He, I think, is the least known person on this list. He's the governor of a very small state. He did run for president, which was interesting, and he, I believe, was in one debate, then dropped out soon after. I think he might have been in two, but he ran a pretty forgettable campaign for president last year, and his equivalent is kind of 2019, 2020 Steve Bullock, because Steve Bullock, who is the Democratic governor of Montana, another smaller state in the northern part of the country, Bullock ran, and he appeared in a few debates, but he really didn't make a big splash. And Bullock obviously dropped out before, anything close to Iowa in the same way to Doug Burgum. And, Doug Burgum, I think, just right off the top, my thoughts are that he'd be a fine candidate to pick. There's a lot of people who really like him because he's kind of in that middle part of the GOP where he's not, a super Trumpian person that is going to back up everything Trump says the way someone like Kari Lake would, or maybe even nowadays JD Vance, I think, would be in that camp. But he's also not like on the end of the GOP where Trump doesn't like him. He's not a Mitt Romney. He's definitely not a Phil Scott. He's not even he's not even a Chris Sununu, and he's not even a moderate governor in any way, shape, or form. He's very socially conservative. He's very fiscally conservative. He's a former businessman, and he's very light on regulations in the state of North Dakota. But he is not, I would say, in terms of rhetoric and in terms of just personality and the way he is known, which he's not very known in general, but from what people do know about him, he is not in the camp of someone like Kari Lake or Josh Hawley or JD Vance. He's kind of in that middle ground where he's close enough to Trump to reasonably be picked to be Trump's VP and, have Trump supporters like him, but he's also not, established himself as a force within the Trump camp. He's not at Mar-a-Lago every weekend, right? So he's kind of an interesting pick because he could really, in a best case scenario, if he was picked to be VP for Trump, he could really unite the GOP, maybe win back some moderates who are kind of on the fence about Trump who would be okay with Burgum. And that's his strength. I think that's the role he would play. That's the upside that he has. And if Trump does go with Burgum, which I think definitely possible, I wouldn't be shocked, I could see it playing out very favorably. Now, there are some downsides. The biggest downside I can think of right now is that Burgum he definitely doesn't, there's really no real risk of him subtracting anything, and there is a chance he adds something, but I think it's more likely that he doesn't really do much than actually doing something. So maybe there's like a 35% chance that he adds to value to the ticket, like in that best case scenario I said, where he brings over moderate Republicans who are on the fence about Trump and secures them. But there's also, I think, a higher chance that that if he's the VP, nothing changes, right? Burgum, again, he's not very well known. He's the governor of a very small state. He's also not, I don't think he's that great of a candidate in general. Like in the VP debate, I don't think he'd shine all that much. I think he's actually a worse debater than Mike Pence. I watched Mike Pence in 2016. I watched Mike Pence a lot in 2020. I've also watched Doug Burgum once when he debated in the first GOP debate back in August. And I think Burgum is a downgrade from Pence in terms of a speaker and debater and just in terms of charisma. And I also just think that Burgum, like, as the governor of a very small, deeply conservative state, there's not a lot that he can say, that would bring swing voters over to Trump, right? Like, if Trump were to pick someone from a swing state or even from a bluer state, which there's not really an option because the other two options are senators from Ohio and Florida. But if he were to pick someone from a blue state or a swing state, that would be another thing he could add to the campaign, right? But Burgum is from a state as conservative as it gets. It's very small. North Dakota is not really representative of the country as a whole. It's a very white state in addition to its, significant Republican lean. And so Burgum, again, I think is kind of bland. I think I can't really think of a scenario in which he's a disaster, but I think it's more likely he doesn't really add anything. So kind of a low risk choice. I don't hate it. If Trump picked it, I'd give him like a B+ for it, but he can do a lot better. But let's go down to our next candidate here, which is JD Vance. JD Vance is a senator from Ohio. He was elected first in 2022. And he got off to a rocky start in the Senate because he actually only won by 6% in this state. He did worse than Trump by 2% in a redder year. And he cost Republicans a lot of money in 2022 when he ran against Tim Ryan because that race narrowed in the polls and Republicans had to divert some of their attention and give it to Vance, who was at the time struggling in Ohio. And so Vance did win, and he is a senator, and he would likely have his job as a senator from the state for as long as he needs. And again, Ohio's getting redder, so if he doesn't get this and he runs for re-election in the Senate in 2028, I have no doubt that he'll win. But to me, I think there's kind of one pro to this pick, and it's to me it's not likely to manifest. JD Vance in 2016 started off as a pretty fierce critic of Donald Trump. And the only, I think, appeal that Vance would give that would add to the ticket would be if he were to say, look, 8-9 years ago, I hated this guy. Now I think he's the right man for the job, right? Like, and that's a powerful statement because, again, in politics, it is always good when you get kind of people who retrospectively say, look, I was wrong about you're a good dude, right? That, I think, would be a powerful appeal from Vance. But it's a double-edged sword because we're not going to get into the cons, of which there are a lot. Vance in 2016 called Donald Trump America's Hitler. He said that. Now, obviously, do we know if he thinks this anymore? I'm not sure. I don't live in JD Vance's brain. But it is incredibly easy for any Democratic or Joe Biden aligned PAC or company to air on national television. This is what, hear what Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate said about him 8 years ago, right? And not only would that hurt Trump, but that would also make Vance look like a flip-flopper. And I think that would really hurt Vance's personal brand. Now, another really, really important part of this is that JD Vance is not, in general, a great candidate. Like I said earlier, he only won by 6 points in Ohio, which is a red state. He did this in a Republican-leaning midterm. So his performances in 2022 weren't that impressive. And he also just comes from an area of the country where I don't think Trump's going to struggle that much, right? Like Vance's appeal would be, in theory, to very right wing, very conservative voters in the Midwest, whether they be farmers or people working in the auto industry or just generally blue collar workers in specific, which is a demographic Trump has usually outperformed with. To me, Vance doesn't really do much because Trump's already good there. Trump will win Ohio by 9, 10, 11 points. Trump will do fine in Indiana. He'll do fine in western Pennsylvania. And that would be where Vance would hopefully help Trump because, again, he's senator from Ohio. And so, again, that, to me, I don't see what value Vance would add there. I think, if anything, he's just a risky choice who would detract. So if Trump picks Vance, I think that'll be a very bad move. I would give this a D or a C- grade at best for Trump. I don't see where this would help him. I think it could backfire in a lot of ways. Vance being a bad electoral performer historically, the things he said about Trump in the past, the fact that he has some scandals, he's already some allegations of him being a flip-flopper. He's originally from San Francisco, which is a very progressive area, and he said some things about the Republican Party in general that are 10, 15 years ago in his past that could be turned back on him. So this is a risky pick, and I don't think Trump should pick Vance. Now, there's a chance he does. I think Trump does like JD Vance based on what I've seen. So it's definitely possible, but I think this is the worst of the three. And so I think we've kind of rated one decent pick, one bad pick. And now this is, I think, the good pick. If Trump were to pick Marco Rubio, I'd give that an A- grade. Now, here are my thoughts on Rubio. To me, there's only one real con, and it's that Rubio is an establishmentarian figure who doesn't, to me, really seem like someone who'd be able to generate support among disaffected voters, which is like, what is Donald Trump's 2024 campaign if not, a sort of rallying cry or last stand for disaffected voters in this country? Trump's made it a lot about himself, like he said stuff like "I'm your retribution." So I think there is an element of the Trump campaign that is self-centered around Trump. But I think more broadly this campaign is about anger, and the same was true in 2016 and I think 2020. But in 2024, I think Trump has a vengeance that we haven't seen from him yet. And so Marco Rubio doesn't really fit that. Like, Doug Burgum, I think, would not directly clash with that. I think JD Vance could help with that. But again, the pros or the cons vastly outweigh the pros, as I just stated. But Marco Rubio is someone that I really think doesn't align with that, because in 2016, like, Doug Burgum was Trump's primary rival in the same way that, like, I don't know, Steve Bullock was Joe Biden's primary rival, or Kamala Harris even was, right? Like, sure, there was a point at which Doug Burgum was running against Trump for the same position, but no one really thinks of it that way. Or the dynamic between Trump and Burgum, no one really thinks of it that way. Trump and Rubio had a pretty fierce battle in the early days of 2016, where Rubio had a real shot at being the GOP nominee for president, and Trump beat him out. And there's obviously, I don't think that bad blood still lingers. Rubio has been a pretty clear advocate for Trump for the past 6-7 years. But again, we really have to think about the past. And I think Trump himself is a very sensitive person. I think Trump doesn't like people who speak out against him or who, go against him in a serious way. Rubio and Trump had some pretty bad exchanges back in 2016. And then even after Trump won the nomination, in, I think, October 2016 in a Florida Senate debate, and I just know this off the top of my head, so I don't remember the exact quote, but he was running against Patrick Murphy, the Democrat, and Rubio in the Senate debate says, look, and I think the moderator asked him a question about who he was voting for. Patrick Murphy obviously says Hillary Clinton, and Marco Rubio says that he says something about how we have two bad options. So even in the fall of 2016, after Trump had won the nomination and was being the GOP candidate for president, Rubio didn't really show that much support for him. So I think that's one reason why Trump might not pick Rubio, but it's another reason I think this is less effective than people might expect. That's the downside, right? Is that Rubio hasn't always been on Trump's side, and he doesn't really fit in with the angry fight for the disaffected people of this country. We are the forgotten people of America are forgotten no longer. Rubio doesn't really fit in with that because that hasn't really ever been his message. His message has always been a little more, I'm a classic conservative. I like Ronald Reagan. I'm going to govern in a way that is similar to the GOP of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And that is fundamentally different from Donald Trump's message. Now, the pros, I think, are a lot. Like, I spent a lot of time in that one con, but I'm just going to go over the pros here. The first pro is that Rubio is from a state that's still semi-competitive. Trump will win Florida no matter what, but I think it's always helpful to do well there. Rubio is, of these three candidates, he's actually gives the GOP a person of color. Rubio is Hispanic. Doug Burgum and JD Vance obviously are both white. Rubio is Hispanic. And, Republicans haven't ever nominated a presidential candidate or VP candidate who is not white, I don't think. Obviously, they've run a woman before with Sarah Palin, but they have not ever ran a non-white candidate for president or vice president. And Democrats kind of, shattered that glass ceiling in 2008 with Barack Obama. Then in 2020, they followed it up with running Kamala Harris as the vice president. But Republicans haven't done that yet. So this would be a pretty historic pick, and I think that would obviously generate some attention for Republicans. And obviously, all coverage is good coverage. But more importantly, Republicans have been knocking at the door with Hispanic voters for the past, I'd say, 4 to 6 years, really. In 2016, Donald Trump didn't do all that well. In 2018, Republicans didn't make any gains, really. But in 2020, Trump did make improvements, especially in Florida and Texas. And in 2022, we saw Republicans do fine with Hispanic voters. They could have done a lot better. They're expected to do a lot better. But the trend did continue. Hispanic voters did move right in 2022 by a little bit. But in 2024, this is a year where Republicans have a real chance. Biden is not popular. Biden has always struggled with Hispanic voters in the polls dating back to 2020. And I think that if Trump were to pick Rubio, he'd have a chance to really, really be serious about gaining with Hispanic voters. Because there's been a lot of hype with this for Republicans, right? And especially, go to South Texas, go to South Florida, go to even parts of New Mexico. Those are three areas where you have a lot of Hispanic voters in rural areas that are culturally conservative. Again, I think one of the biggest or one of the worst things people do when they analyze elections is they group all Hispanic voters in this country into like one block. Like they're all going to swing right, they're all going to swing left. But the truth is, state by state, they're very different, right? Like, Hispanic voters in South Texas in 2020 swung so much towards Trump, while Hispanic voters in, say, the city of Los Angeles did not. Because, again, what matters more, even more so than race, often when predicting election results, is ideology. And a rural Hispanic voter in South Texas is likely to be very religious and thus likely very culturally conservative, whereas a Hispanic voter living in an urban area like Los Angeles is likely to be less religious and less culturally conservative. So, again, not all Hispanic voting blocks are the same. They're actually very different, very complicated. But I think Rubio does have that uniting factor, that he is actually a Hispanic person, and so I think that would obviously help Trump. And Rubio himself is a culturally conservative Hispanic, but he's not like a Trumpian guy, but he's definitely kind of like Doug Burgum. He's kind of in the middle nowadays. So I don't think he would lose any support from to his right. But I think that he would present a reasonable, I'm a conservative person type of pick. And then the final upside of Rubio is that he's a good speaker. Obviously, I think he has one of the worst debate gaffes in history with his, he says the let's dispel with this notion that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing thing from 2016. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. It's very funny. If you haven't seen it before, it's a 10 out of 10 must watch, all-time political blunders. And that was, I think, the only thing that kept Chris Christie's fundraising alive for those weeks after that. But regardless, enough talk about 2016. Talking about 2024, in general, Rubio, I think, is a fine speaker. Again, I doubt he'll have another horrible debate gaffe in a VP debate, but he's a good speaker in general. And aside from that blunder, I think his performance in the 2016 debates was satisfactory. So, Marco Rubio is the best option here, I think, by a good amount. Doug Burgum would be fine. I think Burgum's a little overrated, but he'd be a fine pick. But I think Trump's okay as long as he doesn't pick Vance. If he picks Vance, my confidence that he will win this election, I think, will go down by a decent amount. I'm not a big believer in like the VP, the VP's make or break theory, but I am a believer in VPs still matter, because a lot of people think they don't even matter anymore. But I can think of, even in 2020, an example of Biden choosing Kamala Harris mattering, right? Like, you can read articles of people who do make their decisions based off the VP candidates. So Trump should tread carefully here. I don't think he'll pick JD Vance. I think he'll have too many people in his circle telling him not to, but there's definitely a chance. So my prediction is that he'll pick Rubio, because I think Rubio is the clear-cut best option, and I think that Trump and Rubio have kind of dealt with their beef, because their beef's at this point 8 years old. But it's definitely still up in the air. I'd be pretty surprised if it's not one of these three. But most importantly, let me know what you think. Let me know who you expect to be Trump's choice, and I'll hopefully see you all next time when I have a new microphone and the audio quality significantly better.